welcome to the fourth and final review of the week. Up this time is Formula Retro Racing. Um, yeah, the game is what it is in the tin here. It is a Formula game, not necessarily Formula One, because that requires actual licensing. Formula One is a thing that you actually need to pay for in order to use the actual likeness of. This is legally distinct from that. Like, and
but the cars are the race cars that are specifically made just for racing, not the heavily modified stock cars.
Yes,
that like NASCAR uses.
Yeah, they are Formula One racers, if you will. And the retro racing part, well, that's according to the Steam page. This is a game that is trying to emulate the style of early '90s arcade racers, specifically Virtua Racer. Um, and Virtua Racer, that's actually a really important game that I don't think really gets its due. It kind of gets overshadowed by maybe Virtua Fighter, but Virtua Racing was Sega's first fully polygonal 3D arcade game. It was the first game that used their legendary Model 1 arcade board. Huge leap forward in arcade graphics, and not the only arcade racing game that Sega ever made. Like, Sega GT, Daytona USA, Sega Rally, just to name a few. But this one is specifically going for Virtua Racing. How well it nails the aesthetic? Pretty damn well. If anything, it's not 100% nailing the look of early arcade racers because, well, everything's a bit too clean, everything's a bit too polished. And
the lighting quality is a bit higher.
Yeah, I think that's just down to base assets being a lot more high quality than even the highest quality things you could get in the early '90s.
Yeah, man, it takes a lot of effort to replicate that crappy ass lighting.
And not to mention, replicating pixels that'll stab your eyes.
Yeah.
Yes.
See, I'm fine with it not looking 100% like an early 3D racer.
Yeah, because it does a pretty good job of evoking without actually being exactly the low poly, not really much in the way of texture.
Right.
Style graphics.
Like, look, if there's any era where you can fudge that shit, it's early 3D. We don't want early 3D. We don't want that look. Not 100%, because it looks fucking ugly. It always looked fucking ugly. It's just we put up with it because that's the best we could put out in the 90s.
Yep.
So, like, if somebody's nostalgic for that, I'm like, more power to them. It's just, I don't miss the texture warping. I don't miss the blurry-ass Vaseline vision, and I don't miss the, the bare-ass models. Like, it looked fucking horrible most of the time. And, we have the technology to make this thing, in that style, but, not also wanting you to gouge your eyes out. Anyway, as far as how this game plays, I was actually surprised. The handling and the physics on the arcade racing was a lot more solid than I was expecting. Like the tires are really grippy, and okay, and if the reason that surprises me is because this is emulating arcade racing, and arcade racing tends to be very loosey-goosey, very slidey.
Yep.
And the racing here is shockingly solid. As a racing game, it's pretty good. I think where the issue comes into effect overall with this game is the amount of content. So here's here's a bit of a topsy-turvy uh, content thing that makes sense in context. So in terms of tracks, you only get 8, and only 5 are unlocked at the start. Um, and okay, on the one hand, in modern day terms, that's not a whole lot of tracks. Now, to the credit of this game, those tracks are all unique tracks with different designs.
Mm-hmm.
There are no repeats or no pulling off. Oh, hey, we got 8 tracks, but half of them are fucking mirrored. It's like I can name some N64 racers that did that shit. Like, looking at you, Ridge Racer 64.
Yep.
Ditto you, Multi Racing Challenge. Like, no, your mirror tracks don't fucking count. Anyway, but so 8 tracks. In modern terms, that's not a lot of tracks, but in the context of arcade racing, in terms of like 90s arcade racers, that is a fuck ton of tracks. If there was a Sega arcade racer that had 8 fucking tracks, that would have been really, really that would have been overboard for an arcade racer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe more the home console port, but like even the likes of like the home console port of like Virtua Racing, I think only got like to 3 to 5 tracks. Daytona USA, I think the most that got was like 4 tracks. My point is, arcade racers were not known for having a lot of tracks. They didn't really need them because they were made to be short racing experiences that you plunged a whole bunch of quarters in. They weren't like Gran Turismo or
Forza.
or any real Formula One racing game where you're expected to be putting a lot of hours because there's a lot of shit to do. You've got to drive through licensing tests, or in the terms of like Formula One, you're emulating real racing, so there's a lot more to it than what you do in an arcade racer. So, really, I think the Achilles heel in terms of content is the fact that it's all single races only.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Grand Prix mode, which was a bit surprising. So yeah, you can't really race from like track to track to track. You'd expect like to go through like 3, 4. You know how a Grand Prix works.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you unlock tracks is by placing in races. Like Petty just got 2nd place. That'll earn him about 19 points. And like the first track unlocks after 50 points. Now, and in terms of actual cars, it's only the one car. You can change the paint job, but there's only one type of car here. In terms of modes, there's a few modes. The most notable of which is what they call Eliminator mode, which is a more intense form of racing. You've got to stay at least like 10 paces ahead of the pack, or else you're gone in a certain amount of time. It's not too dissimilar from what you're usually doing, but it adds a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and let's see. In terms of the music, so this is an interesting one. Let's see. How do I like the music in the game is pretty generic, if I'm being honest. And I think that's where this game misses the mark the most in terms of its aesthetical package, because since it's aiming to be invoking the era of classic 90s arcade racers. If you remember, if there's something you remember Sega Racers for, it's the music. Not necessarily good music, but certainly memorable.
Game over, yeah.
It's like I'm pretty sure people here are resisting to, start singing "Rolling Start" or "Blue Blue Skies." You get my, it's like if those words mean anything to you, you know what I'm talking about here. And if they don't, just go watch some footage of Daytona, USA.
if they don't mean anything to you, you might be too young for this podcast, children.
Yeah,
indeed.
Point is, the Sega music was really memorable, and none of that's here. But I suppose that's probably the most elements that they weren't unable to replicate. Because I don't think they were going to be able to get the guy who sang all those songs, because like he was an employee of Sega, if I'm remembering correctly. And attempting to try to do that style, that could have gone really wrong in its own right. So I understand why they went with the safe option. It's like, anyway, in terms of pricing, $12.99. I'm like, that's a bit of a hard one to delineate.
Mm-hmm. Like, if there was, like, a little more content for you to actually do, then, yeah, go ahead. Drive on with your bad self.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, it's the lack of a Grand Prix mode that's stymieing my recommendation. If you want a retro racing experience, this is good up to a point, but it's also the handling that may be a turnoff for people who are looking for real arcade racing. Because once again, actual arcade racing, fucking loose as shit.
Yep.
And then turn the loose up to 20 after that.
Like, and it's not just Sega arcade racers. Like, I remember the Cruisin' series being really loose with its mechanics.
Oh God.
Yeah, my point is, yeah, this is an actual like race, retro racing as you would have experienced in the arcade. This is definitely this is the kind of racing I would have experienced on console. Like it's somewhere in the middle there. So, yeah, ultimately I'd say this is a all right game, slightly above average.
I will say one thing: if you're using a PS4 controller, for some reason Steam's default profile flips accelerator and brake. So accelerator's on the left, or the left trigger, and brake is on the right.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And well, any other comments or questions in regards to Formula Retro Racing?
Not on my end.
Same here. It's a good game.
All right, then. So that'll about do it for Formula Retro Racing. And indeed, that is the end of our first review session for the season. Coming up on the week ahead. So on Wednesday, we'll be having Dez of the Lo-Fi Apocalypse, or LFA games if you're feeling less adventurous. And we'll be talking about a weird asymmetrical action game called Obey. It's really unique, if nothing else. But yeah, it's like I'm not sure if I got my head around this completely. Because so you play as a bunch of bunnies, and one of the bunnies has control over a giant robot, and that robot makes you collect stuff. And the goal of the game is to collect money, Like you're incentivized to collect uranium. The thing about uranium is like for as much as you get, the robot gets 3 times as much, and your goal is also to subvert the robot by getting money from other sources. Yeah, it's weird. It's like I think I got that right. Anyway, so yeah, we'll be talking about that on Monday, or sorry, Wednesday. And coming up on Friday, we do have a Friday show planned, although the guest has not confirmed yet. Ping him again on tomorrow. We'll be having Daniel. I might mispronounce this, so Bolo, yeah, Beaul.
Bolio.
Bolio, there we go. Daniel Bolio of Snot Bubbles Productions. They are the creators of an adventure game called Boreal Tenebrae, which is a retro-style adventure with horror elements, taking cues from the fixed camera angle games of the PS1 era and the dream logic of works like Yume Nikki. Vigilantes beget vigilantes in this web of tree and streets. Explore the interweaving narratives of a northern community cast adrift in an increasingly urbanized world. This town is sick, anger seethes, and builds like static in the original, or in the signal. Will it navigate this sea of noise or be washed away by the degraded wave? Solve the murder, find Sarah, complete the ritual. The truth is deeper still. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about on Friday, hopefully. And yeah, that is what we have planned for this week. So until Wednesday, I shall wish you good gaming.